My name is Natalie Brooks, and I am 36 years old. 3 years ago, I was escorted out of my own company by a security guard who wouldn't meet my eyes. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. 3 floors of the building they were working in were about to become mine. Let me take you back to where it all began. It was 2019, and I was living in a cramped studio apartment in Pittsburgh's Lawrenceville neighborhood. The radiator clanged all night. The windows leaked cold air. And my kitchen consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge that hummed like a dying bee. But that apartment was my laboratory, my sanctuary, my launching pad. Every night after my day job at a mid-tier software consultancy, I'd come home, reheat leftover pizza, and dive into my real work. Lines of code streamed across my laptop screen like digital poetry. I was building something that didn't exist yet, an AI platform that could analyze user emotions in real time through their digital interactions. Not just sentiment analysis, which was crude and binary, but genuine emotional intelligence that could detect nuance, context, and even predict emotional shifts before they happened. The breakthrough came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the same error message for 6 hours, my eyes burning from screen glare and too much caffeine. Then suddenly, it clicked. The algorithm I'd been wrestling with finally learned to distinguish between genuine enthusiasm and performative excitement in user comments. The difference might seem trivial, but for companies trying to understand their customers, it was revolutionary. I ran my first test on social media data from a major retail chain. The results were staggering. My system correctly identified that 73% of positive reviews during their best sale ever campaign were actually expressions of frustration disguised as compliance. Customers were saying what they thought the company wanted to hear, not what they actually felt. Within 6 months, I had a working prototype. Within a year, I had my first client, a pharmaceutical company facing a public relations nightmare over a recalled medication. Traditional sentiment analysis showed mixed reactions to their apology campaign. My system revealed the truth. People weren't just disappointed, they were terrified. The company pivoted their entire communication strategy, addressing fears directly instead of corporate damage control. They not only survived the scandal, but emerged stronger. The crisis that could have cost them billions became a case study in authentic corporate response. Word spread through the tight circles of corporate crisis management. Soon, I was getting calls from Fortune 500 companies, tech startups, even political campaigns. But I stayed small deliberately. I worked alone, occasionally bringing in freelance developers for specific projects. I liked the control, the clarity of purpose, the direct connection between my work and its impact. That's when Redcrest Partners found me. Marcus Bell, their representative, was everything I'd expected from a corporate investor: perfectly pressed suits, strategic pauses in conversation, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He met me at a coffee shop in the Strip District, insisting on buying my latte despite my protests. "Natalie," he said, leaning forward with practiced sincerity, "what you've built here isn't just a product. It's the future of human-computer interaction. But you're thinking too small." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the foam swirl. "Small how? You're running a boutique operation when you could be running an empire." Redcrest Partners sees the vision. "We want to help you scale this. Imagine your technology integrated into every major platform, every customer service interaction, every marketing campaign in America." It sounded appealing. I'll admit, I'd been working 18-hour days for 2 years, living on takeout and determination. The thought of resources, of a team, of not having to handle both the technical development and business side alone was tempting. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Marcus slid a folder across the table. "Full acquisition, generous terms, and most importantly, you'd stay on as Chief Strategy Officer. This would still be your baby, Natalie. We'd just help it grow up." I spent 3 days reviewing their offer with my lawyer, Andrew Hale. Andrew was a solo practitioner who specialized in intellectual property law, someone I'd found through a referral from a fellow developer. He had an office above a bagel shop in Squirrel Hill, and his filing system consisted of manila folders stacked in precarious towers. But his legal mind was sharp as a scalpel. "The financial terms are fair," he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he flipped through the contract pages. "Actually, they're more than fair. But Natalie, this is your life's work. Are you sure you want to give up control?" I'd been thinking about that exact question for 72 hours straight. "I want to see what it can become," I said finally. "And I can't do that alone." Andrew nodded slowly. "Okay, but if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." He pulled out a legal pad and started sketching notes. "I want to add some protective clauses, just in case." "What kind of clauses?" "Call it insurance. If they decide they don't need the founder anymore, you should have options." That's how Section 14D ended up in the contract. Buried on page 47 of a 52-page document, written in dense legal language that made it nearly invisible. The clause stated that if I were terminated without cause within 5 years of the acquisition, I would have the right to repurchase the company for the original sale price within 30 days of termination. The original sale price, $1. I'd insisted on the symbolic amount, wanting to maintain some connection to what I'd built. Redcrest agreed readily, seeing it as a quaint founder's sentiment. After all, they were paying me millions in other forms: stock options, salary guarantees, performance bonuses. What did they care about the technical purchase price? "Do you really think they won't notice this?" Andrew asked as we finalized the language. I smiled, remembering Marcus's eagerness to close the deal, his casual dismissal of legal formalities. "They won't even read it." I was right. The acquisition closed on a sunny Friday in April 2021. There was a small celebration at their downtown office. Champagne and catered sandwiches, handshakes, and business cards exchanged. I signed the papers with a fountain pen Marcus provided, officially transferring ownership of my creation to Redcrest Partners. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. They gave me a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Allegheny River. I had a team of 12 developers, a generous budget for research and development, and the resources to pursue ideas I'd only dreamed about in my studio apartment. But corporate environments have their own ecosystem, their own subtle power dynamics that I'd never experienced as a solo entrepreneur. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with meetings. Suddenly, every decision required a committee. What used to be quick pivots based on client feedback became month-long strategic reviews. I'd propose a technical improvement and be told it needed to align with brand positioning and market penetration strategies. Marcus introduced me to Isla Monroe, the new brand director, during a staff meeting in July. Isla was young, maybe 28, with an MBA from Wharton and a vocabulary filled with terms like synergistic integration and scalable value propositions. She spoke about our technology like it was a consumer product to be packaged and marketed, rather than a sophisticated tool for understanding human emotion. "We need to democratize the user experience," Isla announced during her first presentation to the team. "Make emotional intelligence accessible to everyday businesses, not just crisis management specialists." I raised my hand. The complexity exists for a reason. Emotional analysis isn't something you can simplify without losing accuracy. Isla's smile was bright and dismissive. "That's exactly the kind of technical thinking we need to move beyond. Natalie, we're not just selling algorithms anymore, we're selling transformation." The word transformation became the company's new obsession. Every product update, every client presentation, every internal memo had to demonstrate how we were transforming something. The careful, nuanced approach I developed was gradually replaced by flashier features that looked impressive in demos but produced less reliable results. My original team started leaving. First, it was Tom Rodriguez, my lead algorithm specialist, who took a position at a startup in Austin. Then Sarah Kim, who'd been with me since the early prototype days, accepted an offer from Google. In their exit interviews, they cited strategic differences and changing priorities. But in private conversations, They were more direct. "It's not the same company anymore, Nat. Sarah told me over drinks at our usual spot in Shadyside. They're turning your work into a commodity." I knew she was right, but I also knew that leaving wasn't an option. This was still my technology, my vision, even if it was being implemented in ways I didn't agree with. I thought I could influence the direction from within, steer the ship back toward meaningful innovation. I was naive. By early 2022, my role had shifted from Chief Strategy Officer to what Marcus euphemistically called Founder in Residence. I still had the corner office, still attended executive meetings, but my input was increasingly treated as historical context rather than current strategy. When new clients asked about the technology's development, Isla would introduce me as our visionary founder with the same tone museums use for deceased artists. The final warning came during a quarterly review meeting in September. Marcus, Yella, and 3 other executives I barely knew sat around the conference table, reviewing performance metrics on a large wall-mounted screen. Revenue was up 340% from the previous year. Client retention was strong, and expansion into new markets was ahead of schedule. "Outstanding results," Marcus said, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man whose bonuses were tied to these numbers. "But we need to talk about optimization moving forward." I felt my stomach tighten. In corporate speak, optimization usually meant cuts. "The founder role," Isla began carefully, "while symbolically important, may not align with our operational efficiency goals for 2023. I set down my coffee cup slowly. "What exactly does that mean?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression shifting to what I recognized as his serious conversation mode. "Natalie, no one questions your contributions to this company's foundation. But we're entering a new phase now. Scale requires different skill sets, different perspectives. You're talking about replacing me. We're talking about evolution," Isla corrected. "Your legacy will always be part of our story, but day-to-day operations need to reflect current market realities." I looked around the table at faces that had become increasingly familiar over the past 18 months. These people had never written a line of code, never stayed up until dawn debugging algorithms, never felt the thrill of watching an AI system suddenly understand something profound about human nature. To them, my work was just intellectual property to be leveraged. "I understand," I said quietly. And I did understand. I understood that they'd already made their decision. I understood that my continued presence was now seen as an obstacle rather than an asset. Most importantly, I understood that it was time to implement the insurance policy Andrew had insisted on. That night, I went home to my new apartment in Point Breeze, poured myself a glass of wine, and retrieved the acquisition contract from my filing cabinet. I turned to page 47 and read section 14D for the first time since signing it. The language was exactly as I remembered, clear, specific, and legally binding. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to my bank, requesting a cashier's check in the amount of $1 payable to Red Crest Partners. Then I prepared a formal letter exercising my right to repurchase under the terms of Section 14D, to be delivered upon termination. All I had to do now was wait. The termination meeting was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. on a Thursday in October. I knew what it was the moment I received the calendar invitation, quarterly strategy discussion with Marcus and Isla. No agenda attached. Meeting room booked for only 30 minutes. In my experience, conversations that actually mattered either had detailed agendas or lasted much longer than half an hour. I arrived 5 minutes early, carrying only my laptop bag and water bottle. Marcus and Isla were already there, along with someone from HR I'd met maybe twice. The atmosphere was funeral quiet. "Natalie, please sit down," Marcus began. "We need to discuss your role moving forward." I sat down but didn't respond. Let them fill the silence. "As we mentioned in previous discussions," Isla continued, "the company is entering a new operational phase. We've made the difficult decision to restructure the leadership team to better align with our current strategic objectives. More corporate language, more careful phrasing designed to avoid legal complications." I waited. "Effective immediately," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more formal register. We're transitioning your position. This isn't a reflection of your past contributions, which have been invaluable. It's simply a matter of organizational evolution. Are you firing me? I asked. The HR representative, a thin woman whose name I couldn't remember, consulted her notes. We're terminating your employment relationship. Yes, but we want to emphasize that this is a strategic decision, not a performance-based action. Perfect. Termination without cause. Exactly what Section 14D required. I understand, I said. What's the timeline? Marcus looked relieved that I wasn't arguing or getting emotional. We'd like you to transition out today. Turn in your laptop and access cards. Clean out your office. We'll handle the final paperwork and send your severance information by email. I nodded and stood up. I'll need about 20 minutes to gather my personal items. Actually, Isla interjected, we'd prefer if you didn't return to your office. Anything personal can be shipped to you. For security reasons. Security reasons, as if I might sabotage the technology I'd created. But I just smiled and nodded. Fine, I'll need my laptop bag back. Though, it has my personal phone charger. They handed over my bag after a brief consultation with HR about protocol. I walked out of the conference room, took the elevator to the lobby, and signed out with the security guard who'd checked me in thousands of times over the past year and a half. Have a good evening, Ms. Brooks, he said without looking up from his monitor. You too, David. I walked 6 blocks to my car, drove home through the evening traffic, and poured myself another glass of wine. Then I pulled out the cashier's check I'd prepared weeks earlier and the letter I'd drafted, updated the date, and printed it on my home printer. The next morning, I hand-delivered both documents to Redcrest Partners' legal department. The initial response was confusion. A junior associate called me around noon, asking if there'd been some mistake with the paperwork. I referred him to Section 14D of the acquisition agreement and suggested he have a senior attorney review the language. By 3 p.m., my phone was ringing constantly. Marcus left 3 voicemails, each one more agitated than the last. Isla sent a series of increasingly frantic emails. The company's legal counsel, a partner at one of Pittsburgh's most prestigious firms, requested an emergency meeting. I didn't respond to any of them until Monday morning, when I sent a brief email to Marcus. Per the terms of Section 14D, I have exercised my right to repurchase the company. The transaction is legally complete. I'll be in touch regarding transition logistics. What they didn't understand yet was that while they'd been focused on revenue growth and market expansion, they'd never actually completed the legal merger of my original company with their corporate structure. On paper, I still owned the entity that held all the core intellectual property. What they'd been operating was essentially a licensing agreement that terminated the moment I repurchased the shares. Andrew had discovered this oversight during his preparation for the repurchase, buried in the initial due diligence documents that Redcrest's lawyers had apparently skimmed rather than thoroughly reviewed. It was a rookie mistake, the kind of thing that happens when acquisitions are rushed and legal teams assume routine paperwork doesn't require careful attention. The first domino fell on Tuesday morning when I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, CEO of Meridian Financial, one of our largest clients. Jennifer had been using our technology to analyze customer feedback during a major digital transformation initiative. Natalie, I just got a very strange call from someone at Redcrest Partners claiming there's been a change in company ownership. Can you clarify what's happening? It's simple, Jennifer. I've reacquired my company. The technology you've been using, the algorithms, the analytical framework, all of that was developed by me and remains under my control. So who am I supposed to work with moving forward? The same person you've been working with all along, me. Word spread quickly through the network of clients and partners I'd built over the years. By Wednesday, 4 major accounts had formally notified Redcrest that they were suspending their contracts pending clarification of the ownership situation. By Friday, the company's stock price had dropped 28%. Marcus finally reached me the following Monday. Natalie, we need to talk. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. I agree, I said. It's unfortunate that it came to this. Look, obviously there were some miscommunications about your role in the company. maybe we can work something out. Bring you back in a consulting capacity, or as an advisor. I almost laughed. 3 weeks earlier, they'd treated me like outdated furniture to be quietly removed. Now they wanted to negotiate. Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to Redcrest Partners. However, if you'd like to discuss licensing agreements for any technology you've developed using my intellectual property, I'm open to those conversations. The silence on the other end of the line lasted nearly 30 seconds. Are you serious right now? He finally asked. Completely. My lawyer will be in touch with your legal team to discuss the details. What followed was 3 months of legal maneuvering, tense negotiations, and corporate crisis management. Redcrest Partners had built their entire growth strategy around technology they no longer controlled. Their expansion plans, investor presentations, and client commitments were all based on assets that had just walked out the door. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. I leased 3 floors in the same downtown building where Redcrest had their offices, directly below their space. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, especially when my former colleagues started reaching out. Tom Rodriguez was the first to call. Nat, I heard through the grapevine that you're back in business. Are you hiring? Within 6 weeks, I'd reassembled most of my original team, plus several new developers who'd been following the story in tech blogs and wanted to be part of what they saw as a David versus Goliath narrative. We called the new company Emotional Intelligence Solutions, and we picked up right where we'd left off before the acquisition. But with more focus and fewer corporate compromises. The technology had evolved during my time at Redcrest, but not necessarily in ways I agreed with. They'd prioritize speed and simplicity over accuracy and depth. We spent our first quarter rebuilding the core algorithms with the sophisticated approach I'd originally envisioned, creating something more powerful than what either company had been able to achieve separately. Our client base grew rapidly, fueled partly by industry curiosity about the whole situation and partly by the improved performance of our updated platform. Companies that had been working with Redcrest's simplified version were amazed by the insights they gained from our more nuanced analysis. But the real vindication came in March, when I was invited to give a keynote presentation at Tech Forward, one of the industry's most prestigious conferences. The invitation came directly from the conference organizers, who'd been following the story and wanted to hear my perspective on entrepreneurship, corporate acquisitions, and what they called founder resilience. The speech was scheduled for the final day of the conference, the prime slot that usually went to established tech celebrities or prominent investors. I spent weeks preparing not just the content, but the narrative arc, the emotional journey I wanted to take the audience through. The auditorium was packed, over 2,000 people, including journalists, investors, executives, and entrepreneurs. I walked onto the stage wearing a simple black dress and carrying a single index card with my opening line written on it. 3 years ago, I began. I was escorted out of my own company by a security guard who wouldn't meet my eyes. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. The room was absolutely silent. I had their attention. I told them about the late nights in my studio apartment, about the breakthrough moment when the algorithm finally understood human emotion, about building something that mattered and watching it transform entire industries. I talked about the decision to sell, the hope that partnership would amplify impact, and the gradual realization that corporate environments could corrupt even the most innovative ideas. Then I told them about Section 14D. My lawyer insisted on what he called an insurance policy, I said, pulling the $1 bill from my jacket pocket that I'd brought as a prop. If they fired me without cause, I could buy back my company for exactly what I'd sold it for. I held up the bill so the audience could see it clearly. $1. The murmur that rippled through the auditorium was audible even on stage. I explained the legal oversight, the intellectual property confusion, the moment when I realized they'd never actually merged the entities properly. I talked about the 3 months of rebuilding, about reassembling my team, about creating something stronger than what had existed before. But here's what I really want you to understand, I said, moving away from the podium to address the audience more directly. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about knowing your worth and protecting your life's work. It's about reading contracts carefully, understanding legal language, and never assuming that other people will value what you've created as much as you do. I paused, scanning the faces in the front rows. Most importantly, it's about remembering that if you built something once, you can build it again, better, stronger, more aligned with your original vision. The applause started slowly, scattered clapping from different sections of the auditorium. Then it built, becoming sustained applause, then a standing ovation that lasted nearly 3 minutes. I stood on that stage, looking out at an audience of my peers, and felt something I hadn't experienced since those early days in my apartment: complete confidence in my own capabilities. After the speech, I was surrounded by journalists, investors, and entrepreneurs wanting to hear more details, share their own stories, or explore potential partnerships. Business cards were exchanged, meetings were scheduled, and several venture capital firms expressed interest in funding our expansion. But the most satisfying moment came when I returned to my hotel room and found a text message from Sarah Kim, my former colleague who'd left for Google. "Watched your keynote online. That was fucking beautiful. Nat. Welcome back." The media coverage was extensive and overwhelmingly positive. Tech blogs called it the comeback story of the year. Business publications wrote about the legal lessons for both entrepreneurs and investors. Social media exploded with commentary, most of it praising my strategic thinking and criticizing corporate environments that undervalue founders. Redcrest partners, meanwhile, struggled to recover from the loss of their core technology and the negative publicity surrounding their treatment of a founder. They eventually pivoted to become a more traditional consulting firm, but never regained the growth trajectory they'd been on before the acquisition unraveled. Marcus Bell left the company 6 months later to start his own investment fund. Idla Monroe took a position with a marketing agency in Seattle. I wished them well, genuinely. They'd been players in a corporate system that often puts short-term gains ahead of long-term vision. But they weren't inherently bad people. Emotional intelligence solutions continued to grow throughout 2023 and into 2024. We developed new applications for our technology in healthcare, education, and political communication. Our platform helped hospitals improve patient satisfaction scores, assisted teachers in identifying students who were struggling emotionally, and provided politicians with insights into voter sentiment that went far beyond traditional polling. But success wasn't just measured in revenue or client acquisition. It was measured in the satisfaction of building something meaningful with people who shared my vision, in the freedom to pursue technical excellence without corporate compromise, and in the knowledge that I'd fought for my life's work and won. The studio apartment in Lawrenceville, where this whole journey began, now houses a young developer named Marcus who's working on machine learning applications for environmental monitoring. I met him when I went back to the neighborhood for lunch with Tom Rodriguez, and he reminded me so much of myself 5 years earlier, brilliant, determined, and slightly naive about the business world he was about to enter. I gave him Andrew Hale's business card and some advice about reading contracts carefully. Because in this industry, in this world, you never know when you might need a really good insurance policy. The story could end there, with triumph and vindication, with lessons learned and justice served. But the truth is that real life doesn't have neat endings. And the most important parts of any story are often what happen after the dramatic moments fade. Today, 3 years after walking back into that downtown building as a landlord rather than an employee, I still wake up every morning excited about the work. Not because I proved something to people who underestimated me, but because I get to spend my days solving problems that matter with people who understand why the details matter. Sometimes former colleagues from Redcrest reach out, asking about opportunities with my new company. I consider each case individually, focusing on their skills and potential, rather than their past associations. A few have joined our team and become valuable contributors. Others I've referred to positions elsewhere in the industry that better match their interests. The $1 bill that I used as a prop during my keynote speech is now framed on my office wall. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that the most powerful weapons in business aren't always the most obvious ones. A reminder that patience and preparation matter more than immediate gratification. Most importantly, a reminder that if you're going to bet everything on your own abilities, you'd better make sure you can deliver. Because at the end of the day, they didn't laugh when I walked out. They didn't even notice I was gone until it was too late. But when I walked back in as their landlord, when I rebuilt everything they thought they'd taken from me, that's when the real laughter began. And this time, I was the one doing the laughing.